Hello there, welcome to Wardlaw Mausoleum. My name's Paul. I'm going to give you a description of the weapons that would have been associated with the Highland clans during the time of the Jacobite Wars. Now the first weapon I'm going to tell you about is this one here. It's probably the most famous of all Highland weapons. This is the claymore, known as the Great Cleaver. It's a large two-handed sword that was first used around the very end of the 15th century. Now it's designed to be swung across a man's body, aiming towards the neck, shoulder or collarbone. When this weapon first came into use, men were still wearing some forms of chainmail, heavy padded armor or leather buff coats. Swords won't necessarily cut through that armor, but this weapon brought across a man's neck, shoulder or collarbone will smash and crush bones. Also, the blade wasn't entirely sharp, only the last 5 or 6 inches were sharp. That way in close combat you can grip the blade and use it to thrust towards your opponent. The last time this weapon would be used in any great numbers was at the Battle of Killiecrankie in 1689, a victory for the Jacobites. But as the Highlanders charged across you can simply with hands on the sword, they charged into musket fire. They had no defense against that musket fire, so this weapon would be abandoned and they'd start using slightly different weapons. But this is a very large sword. It's difficult to carry around. In fact, you can't just place it in a sword belt because as you walk, it'll drag on the floor. You can't carry it on your shoulder. If somebody calls your name and you turn quickly, there's a chance that you're going to cut somebody's head off. So this would be carried in a baldric, which is basically a leather scabbard which goes over the blade with a rope from the top to the bottom. You can simply loop it on top of your back and carry it very easily. If you're attacked, you could untie the rope at the very bottom, swing the sword around, remove the baldric, and you would be ready to fight. So it's a very, very effective weapon, but like I say, the last time it was used in 1689 at the Battle of Killiecrankie. By the time of the later Jacobite risings, the weapons have changed. And because of different levels of Highland society, different men would carry different weapons. The poorer men within society might carry something like this. This is a Lochaber axe. It's named the Lochaber axe after the Fort William area where they believe it was first developed. In fact, if you still visit the area of Fort William today, the welcome signs actually have 2 Lochaber axes crossed. Now it's believed it originated as a farm implement. Many people believe it was a plough blade attached to a pole and used as a weapon. And I will say this is a very short Lochaber axe. It can be up to 10 to 15 feet in length. The length means you can keep your enemy at a distance, and the blade is used for hacking and slashing. The hook on the back is used against cavalry. As the cavalryman charges towards you, you can simply reach up, grab his clothing, drag him from the horse and finish him off. Now at the Battle of Prestonpans in 1745, the MacGregors used this weapon in a specific manner. As the British cavalry charged across the field, the MacGregors grasped the very ends of the Lochaber axe and began swinging them around their heads in a reaping motion. They were looking to cut the legs off the horses. If you cut the legs off a horse, the horse will drop to the ground and the rider becomes much easier to deal with. So this is a very simple weapon, but very effective when used correctly. But the wealthier Highlanders would have been armed slightly differently. The first thing that they would have carried is this. This is a targe, sometimes known as a target. It's roughly 19 inches in diameter and is 2 pieces of wood glued together with the grains running in opposite directions. That way, if one piece of wood breaks, you still have a second piece behind it to protect you. It's covered with heavy leather on the front and deer hide on the back. It's then heavily studded. This isn't just for design, it also helps add strength to the targe, but also helps deflect musket balls. And in the middle is a dome. Sometimes this dome would contain a large metal spike. Behind the targe, I will carry my dirk. It's my everyday knife. I use this for hunting, cooking and fishing, but in battle I will hold it in my hand behind the targe so that a large portion sticks out of the bottom. That way I can use it to cut and rake towards my opponent's body. But my main weapon is my basket-hilted broadsword. Now broadsword means it's a broad blade sharpened on both sides. It's used for hacking and slashing in both directions. The basket protects my hand, but it's also a very useful knuckle duster in close combat. I have a rear wrist guard, and also at the front there are 2 loops of metal known as ears or lugs. These are used for if an opponent's blade slides down mine, I can trap it, perhaps disarming him or even breaking his blade. Now the Highlanders would use their weapons in a specific manner. When the enemy came onto the battlefield, they began banging their swords and shields together to create much noise and try and intimidate the enemy. When the order to charge is given, they'll surge across the field, protecting their upper body behind the targe. When they reach the front line of the enemy, they'll push into them, trying to knock them off balance. They'll then cut towards the body with a dirk and hack with a sword, which means they were effective at punching their way through enemy lines. Now, the enemy at the time was the British Army, and they carried slightly different weapons. In fact, rather than being armed and fighting primarily with swords, they used a musket. Their main musket was this right here. It's the Brown Bess musket. It's called a Brown Bess, many people believe, because when it rains, the barrel turns brown with rust. It's also a smooth bore gun, which means inside the barrel is completely smooth. There is no rifling. So it doesn't have a very accurate long range. In fact, it's probably accurate up to about 80 to 120 yards. Anything that beyond that, then the ball tends to veer off in a different direction. Now, the British soldiers would be trained to load and fire this in combat, and for that they'd be issued paper ammunition. And that would look something like this. It would have a lead ball in the bottom and gunpowder in the top. To load your gun, first of all, you half-cock it. The gun is now on safety and will not fire. This is where we get the term going off half-cocked from. You then take one of the cartridges and you bite the top off, revealing the gunpowder. You pour a small amount of powder inside the pan and you close it shut. The rest of the powder goes down the barrel, followed by the paper and the ball. You then remove the ramrod and you ram the entire charge to the bottom of the gun. Soldiers were trained to do this with 2 fingers because this is metal on metal. If you create a spark, the gun will go off, and it's better to lose 2 fingers than your entire hand. The ramrod is then placed back inside the stock. You cock the gun and it was ready to fire. A British soldier was expected to do that 3 times a minute. Now, when you fire the gun, you pull the trigger, and this hammer, which has a flint in its mouth, will move forward and hit this metal plate called a frizzen. It pushes the frizzen open, creating sparks which rain down on the powder, and I'll try and show you that now. The sparks will ignite the powder within the pan, and the gun then goes off, or you hope the gun goes off. If your powder gets wet, there's very little chance that your gun will fire, and in those cases, it's much more effective as a club than anything else. But for hand-to-hand combat, the British soldier was issued with one of these. This is a socket bayonet. It's 17 inches of fluted steel. What I mean by fluted is if you look down the blade, you can see it's almost triangular in shape. Socket bayonet means it goes around the barrel and it locks in place, so you can load and fire the gun with the bayonet attached. At the Battle of Killiecrankie, the British Army were issued plug bayonets, which is simply a dagger you have to force inside the barrel, meaning every man has to make the decision to load and fire or fix bayonets. You couldn't do both at the same time. But with the bayonet attached, I now have an effective reach of about 6 feet. But we know in previous battles against the Highlanders and the Jacobites, they were able to smash their way through the British line. So prior to the Battle of Culloden, the Duke of Cumberland came up with a plan. This was a special bayonet drill. Now, as the Highlanders charged across the field, if you stab your bayonet towards the man in front of you, he is defended by his targe, and you'll simply knock the bayonet out of the way and push its way through the line. So the Duke of Cumberland decided that every man should ignore the soldier or the Highlander in front of him and should turn and attack the man to the right. Because the Highlander to the right will have his sword arm in the air, and you can simply step across and bayonet him in the armpit. Now that sounds like a wonderful plan, but there are a few problems with it. First of all, each soldier has to ignore the very large man charging towards him intent on killing him, and he has to focus on the man off to the right. He also has to hope that the man standing beside him keeps his focus and kills the Highlander running right at him. And at the very end of every British regiment, there is one soldier that has nobody standing to his left, so he's expected to take care of 2 Jacobites. Now, I don't like to say whether the bayonet drill worked or not, but what I will say is at the Battle of Culloden, where it was used, where the Highlanders made contact with the British Army, they were still able to force their way through the lines. So I'll let you make your own mind up about that.